The sky over Bitter Ridge was bruised purple, the sun sinking like a dying ember behind the dusty silhouettes of ramshackle buildings. Wind whispered through the narrow alleyways, carrying with it the stench of sweat, whiskey, and something sour desperation. The crowd gathered in the open square just outside the saloon, voices clashing in drunken shouts and idle chatter. At the center of it all stood a rickety auction platform, and beside it, cage. It was barely large enough for a dog, let alone a girl. Inside sat a young Apache woman, her knees drawn up to her chest, eyes hollow yet burning. Her long black hair hung in snarled ropes down her back, tangled with twigs and dried blood. Dirt caked her skin, and her lower lip bore the purple-green signature of a recent blow. Chains rattled whenever she shifted, though she hadn't moved in hours. The auctioneer, Tommy Ray, a man with too many teeth and too little soul, stood before the crowd, waving a bottle of rye and a cowhide whip. "Now this here's a wild one," he bellowed. "Caught just east of Devil's Notch. Tricky to break, but good stock. Strong. Quiet. Real obedient after a few lashes." The crowd laughed. Someone whistled. From the edge of the square, Silas McGraw watched. He leaned against a fence post, worn Stetson pulled low, duster flapping at his ankles. He wasn't a tall man, nor particularly broad, but there was something about the way he stood, like a man who'd been struck by lightning and never flinched. His face was a roadmap of time. Sunburnt skin, a silver beard, eyes the color of iron and just as cold. He didn't drink, didn't gamble, didn't smile. Folks said he hadn't spoken more than 20 words in the past 5 years. Silas hadn't come to town for this. He'd come for fencing nails and salt. But there she was, caged like a creature, her gaze cutting through the laughter like a blade through linen. She didn't look at anyone in the crowd. She looked beyond them, past them, through them. "Who'll give me $20? Tommy Ray barked. "10 then. She eats little, fights hard. Could be a pet, a servant. Hell, even a woman if you've got the patience." More laughter. "5. The auctioneer tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. "Hell, I'll give 5 just to watch her scratch someone's eyes out," shouted a ranch hand, tossing a coin that landed short of the platform. Still no takers. Then a voice came, not loud, but sharp, clear, and utterly unexpected. 5. Heads turned. Silas stepped forward, his boots crunching in the grit. He didn't look at Tommy Ray, didn't look at the girl. He simply reached into his coat pocket and pulled out 5 silver dollars. Clean, shining like they'd never been spent before. Tommy Ray blinked, then laughed nervously. "Well now, Mr. McGraw, I didn't figure you for." Silas raised one hand. Just one. Tommy Ray shut his mouth. A hush rolled over the square like a tide. Someone coughed. A horse snorted in the background. Even the wind seemed to pause. Silas walked to the platform and held out the money. Tommy Ray took it with trembling fingers, unsure if he just sold a girl or signed his own death warrant. Silas didn't wait for the key. He stepped around the cage, took one look at the rusty lock, and struck it with the butt of his Colt. The latch popped open with a metallic groan. The Apache girl stared at him. Didn't move. Didn't breathe. Silas opened the door. He stepped back. She didn't leap out. Didn't run. Didn't cry or scream or plead. She unfolded herself slowly, gracefully, like a cougar from a trap. Her feet hit the ground. Her eyes, dark as midnight and just as unforgiving, met his. Silas turned and walked. She followed. The crowd parted, silent now, uncertain whether they'd just witnessed a rescue or a claim. A few murmured. One man spat and muttered, "Goddamn fool." Another crossed himself. Silas never looked back. They walked side by side down the main street, the sun casting long shadows behind them. The town faded behind them like a bad dream as they reached the edge of the ridge. The girl paused, looking once over her shoulder. There was no gratitude in her eyes, only the caution of someone who's learned that even kindness can be a trick. Silas didn't speak, didn't expect thanks. He just adjusted his hat and gestured toward the trail. The two of them disappeared into the horizon, where the land turned wild and the sky stretched wide and merciless. And somewhere behind them, in the dirt where the cage once stood, 5 silver coins lay gleaming in the dust like the price of a soul. The trail to Silas McGraw's ranch twisted like a scar across the earth, flanked by skeletal mesquite trees and scattered stone. The air smelled of sage and smoke, the silence broken only by the occasional call of a hawk or the clatter of hooves on dry rock. Keoma rode behind him on a borrowed mule, her hands gripping the worn leather of the saddle, her eyes fixed on the back of the man who had paid $5 to open her cage. He hadn't spoken a word since they left town. She didn't trust him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But he hadn't laid hands on her. He hadn't stared. Hadn't asked questions. And that, in itself, was more mercy than she'd expected. The ranch sat low in a shallow valley, bordered by cottonwood trees and the brittle remains of a barbed wire fence. The main house leaned slightly, its wood warped from years of sun and wind. A single barn stood behind it, doors ajar, as if expecting ghosts to wander in. No cattle in sight, no dogs barking, no signs of anyone but Silas. He dismounted, motioned for her to follow, then led the mule to a rusted water trough. She slid off the saddle and landed light-footed, warier here in the quiet than she'd been in the shouting of town. He pointed to the porch, left a bundle wrapped in canvas on the steps, food, maybe, or clothes, then disappeared inside without a word. Keoma stood still for a long time, watching the door, unsure if this was a trap wrapped in kindness. She didn't go in. Not that day. She curled up instead beneath a cypress tree beside the barn, her head resting on her arms, her body coiled tight, like a wire ready to snap. In the morning, he brought her coffee in a tin cup and left it by the fence post. Days passed like that, quiet, slow, cautious. He never asked her name, never tried to touch her. She watched him work, mending broken boards, hauling water from the well, cleaning out the old smokehouse. His movements were steady, methodical. Each action said, "I expect nothing from you." The food came twice a day, cornbread, beans, smoked jerky, always left on the steps. When she left the empty tin by the barn, she found a small cloth bundle in its place the next day. Inside was a comb. Keoma spent that evening by the creek, combing the tangles from her hair with careful fingers. She stared into the rippling water and didn't recognize the face looking back. The bruises were fading, but the eyes hadn't changed. She started marking the barn walls with Apache symbols, simple ones at first: water, fire, spirit. She didn't know why. Maybe she wanted the land to know she was here. Maybe she wanted to leave something behind in case she vanished again. Silas saw the markings, but said nothing. One afternoon, she found a foal tangled in a barbed fence near the southern pasture. It kicked wildly, blood streaking its flank. Keoma approached slow, murmuring in her native tongue, hands outstretched. The foal stilled, trembling. She cut the wire with a hatchet, pressed cloth to the wound, and led it limping back to the barn. That evening, Silas found her brushing the animal down with a gentleness that defied her silence. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching. "You've got a steady hand," he said. His voice was low, rough as gravel. Foal would have bled out by sundown. She didn't respond. He nodded once and walked away. That was the first time he'd spoken in her presence. A week later, she caught him chasing a chicken across the yard with a bucket and a stick, cursing under his breath every time it dodged. He slipped on a patch of mud and landed hard on his back, the chicken triumphant and squawking. She laughed, not loud but real, startled even herself. He lay there a moment, then looked over and smiled, just a little. Glad someone's enjoying this damn comedy. Something shifted after that. She started helping, not because he asked, but because she wanted to. Fixing broken shutters, stacking firewood, feeding the mule. They didn't speak much, but the silence became less heavy. She started carving things again, small animals, feathers, birds. She left them on the porch. He never said anything, but he kept every one. One night, she found him asleep on the porch, journal open on his lap. In it, she saw sketches, rough drawings of the land, the barn, and her. Always from behind, always respectful, as if he were trying to remember, not possess. She closed the book gently and left a carved hawk on the windowsill. But not all things stayed quiet. Riders had been seen up near Devil's Notch. Bounty hunters. Apache trackers turned for coin. They came looking for strays, wanted posters, burned-out camps, blood trails. The sheriff came by one morning, chewing on a matchstick, hat in hand. "You still got her out here, Silas?" he asked, glancing toward the barn. "Word is, there's $500 riding on her head, dead or alive." Silas didn't blink. "Then tell them to come see me direct." The sheriff sighed. "Ain't saying I agree with it. Just saying folks'll talk. Some might come armed." "Let 'em." After the sheriff left, Silas went out back and sharpened his axe in silence. When he was done, he placed a whetstone in her hands and nodded toward the barn. "Your turn." That night, Keoma didn't sleep under the cypress. She slept on the porch, not beside him, but close enough to hear if he breathed, close enough to know she wasn't alone anymore. The morning came harsh and red, the sky streaked like an open wound. Silas stood at the fence line, his hand resting on the post where Keoma had carved a hawk. He didn't need to say it. She already knew. They were coming. By noon, the dust cloud rose over the southern hills. 3 riders. Bounty hunters, not locals. The kind who didn't ask questions, didn't leave names, and didn't care what the law thought of their business. They were dressed in dark coats and wore smiles too thin to be real. Silas saddled his horse slowly, watching the horizon. Keoma stood by the barn, rifle in hand. He had taught her to shoot 3 days ago, more out of instinct than plan. She had learned fast. "You don't have to stay," he said, finally breaking the stillness. "I know," she answered, not looking at him. He pulled the rifle from its holster and checked the chamber. "They'll kill for 500. Won't blink twice." Keoma's voice was steady. "Then we make them blink." They didn't speak again. The first shot cracked through the valley, just past 3 o'clock. A warning, not an attack. One of the bounty hunters rode up slow, waving a white cloth like it meant something. Silas stepped out from behind the corral gate, rifle raised. "Don't want trouble," the man called. "Just want the girl." "She's not for sale," Silas replied. "You paid 5. I'm offering 500. Think about it." Silas chambered around. The man turned his horse and rode back. They came hard the second time, guns drawn, hooves pounding, no more pretending. Bullets tore through the barn's side, splinters flying like shrapnel. Silas dropped one rider clean off his saddle with a single shot. The second circled around, trying to flank. Keoma, crouched behind the water trough, waited for his shadow. When it came, she pulled the trigger. The man screamed, fell, and didn't get back up. The last bounty hunter reached the porch. Silas met him halfway, shotgun against revolver, steel against fury. The shot echoed off the canyon walls. The man hit the ground, blood blooming across his chest like wild poppies. Then silence. Smoke rose from the barn's roof. The chicken coop was gone. The mule was limping. Silas dropped to his knees, breath ragged. Blood soaked through his shirt, shoulder wound. Not fatal, but deep. Keoma ran to him, hand slick with his blood before she even touched him. "Stay with me," she whispered, pressing her palms against the wound. "Don't you dare die on me." His eyes fluttered. "Ain't planning on it." They dragged him inside and stitched the wound with threads soaked in whiskey. He never cried out. Not once. Keoma's hands shook, but her voice never did. She spoke in Apache as she worked, the words old and sacred. That night, as Silas drifted in and out of sleep, he felt her hand in his. Warm. Real. When dawn broke, he was alive. The town came to know by the next morning. The sheriff rode out, found 3 bodies and a blood trail leading to the house. He didn't knock, just tipped his hat at Keoma as she stood on the porch, rifle in arm, expression stone set. "More'll come," he warned. "The bounty won't die just 'cause they did." Silas stood behind her, pale but upright. "Then I guess we'll just have to outlive the price." The sheriff didn't argue. Later that week, Keoma packed a satchel. No words, no tears. She moved with the quiet resolve of someone who'd already made peace with goodbye. She left at sunrise, heading west toward the hills. She got half a mile before she found Silas, waiting by the river crossing. sitting atop his horse like a statue carved from dust and memory. "You didn't think I'd let you leave without a goodbye, did you?" he asked. "I can't stay. They'll keep coming." "I know." She opened her mouth, then closed it. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "A deed. I signed it over," he said. "The ranch. The land. My name." Her brow furrowed. "Why?" "Because it's not just mine anymore." "I didn't ask for that." "No, but you earned it." She stared at the paper, then at him. "I don't know what to do with it," she whispered. "Figure it out," he said. "Make it something better than what it was." Wind tugged at her braid. The river flowed slow behind them. A hawk circled above, crying out once before soaring westward. She took the deed. He turned his horse and rode back without another word. That night, Kioma didn't sleep beneath the stars. She slept inside the house, door locked, rifle by her side. In the morning, she carved a new sign for the gate. The old one had read, McGraw Ranch. The new one simply said Kioma. The wind rolled in over the plains like a memory, soft, unsettled, and full of voices. The ranch looked different now. Fences had been mended, the barn rebuilt from scorched timber, and the fields, once dry and stubborn, now held rows of fresh earth, waiting for spring. The sign at the gate no longer bore Silas's name. Just Kioma, cleanly carved, defiantly plain. A name born from fire, written in wood. She stood at the porch rail as dawn cracked open the sky. Her shadow stretched long over the dirt. Her hands were calloused now, her eyes clearer. No longer hunted, no longer hidden. The rifle leaned quietly against the doorframe, not out of fear but habit. She wasn't the girl in the cage anymore. She was something else entirely. Silas came limping up from the south pasture, one arm still slow to rise, but stronger than it had any right to be. He moved with a weariness that didn't bother trying to hide. A man half rebuilt by time and stubbornness. He gave her a nod, and she returned it. That was how they spoke now, mostly. In gestures and rhythms. Words were used only when needed, and rarely wasted. "Fence lines holding," he said finally, brushing dust from his hat. "Good," she answered. He handed her a scrap of paper. A drawing rough, scratched in charcoal. A small building with a pitched roof and a bell. She tilted her head. "A school. For kids like you," he said. "Kids like I never knew. Apache. Orphans. Whoever needs it." She didn't smile, but her eyes warmed. "And who's going to teach them?" "You are," he said. "If you want to." Kioma folded the drawing and slid it into her pocket. "Then you better start cutting wood." That spring, children came. At first, they were shy. 2 boys from the trading post, a girl whose family had lost everything in a fire. Then more. Word traveled faster than wagons. The ranch became a place people whispered about. A place where names didn't matter as much as stories did. Some of the children were white, some native, some mixed. Kioma welcomed them all. She taught them to read using tattered books salvaged from the old church downriver. Silas taught them to shoot, to mend, to survive without cruelty. Between lessons, they planted peach trees and painted walls and built something that felt dangerously close to peace. One evening, as dusk stretched across the sky, Kioma sat on the porch with her feet propped on the railing, her fingers working a carving knife across a block of cedar. A hawk began to take shape, its wings outstretched in mid-flight. Behind her, Silas sat sharpening his tools, the metallic rasp filling the air like an old song. "Do you regret it?" she asked without turning. "Regret what?" "Giving it all away." He paused, staring at the horizon where the sun met the ridgeline. "I gave up a name, a piece of land, a life that was already dying," he said. "In return, I got a second one. That don't feel like loss." She nodded, and the silence returned like an old friend. Later, when the children had gone to sleep and the night was thick with crickets, Silas stood by the fire pit, holding a cup of strong coffee in his weathered hands. "You think the past can ever really stay buried?" he asked. Kioma joined him, the flames painting shadows across her face. "No," she said, "but I think we can choose where to plant it." They stayed out until the moon was high, watching stars fade in and out between drifting clouds. By midsummer, The ranch was a different place. The wild edges were still there. The land didn't forget what it had been, but something softer had taken root. The barn held tools and laughter. The corral echoed with hoofbeats and children's games. Even the mules seemed to walk prouder. Strangers still came sometimes. Men looking for bounties, for easy coin. But when they reached the gate and saw the name on the sign, saw the rifle in Keoma's hand and the quiet storm in her eyes, they often turned back without a word. One didn't. He came late one evening, covered in trail dust and arrogance. Claimed the bounty was still live. Claimed she was still property. Silas stepped forward, slow and sure, and told the man to ride back the way he came. The man reached for his gun. He didn't leave alive. The children never saw the body, and the ground where he fell never grew anything after that. But no one ever tried again. As autumn cooled the air and painted the hills gold, Keoma stood before the class, tracing letters in the dirt with a stick. The children repeated the sounds after her, stammering and smiling. When one boy asked why the hawk flew alone, she told him, "Because sometimes it's safer to see from above." "Is that why you lived in a cage?" the girl beside him asked innocently. Keoma's hand froze mid-stroke. She turned, quiet for a moment. "I lived in a cage," she said, "because someone decided my spirit was dangerous. But a spirit can't be owned. It can only be broken or freed." Later that day, she found Silas at the creek, fishing with a rusted rod he refused to replace. "I told them about the cage," she said. He nodded, pulling a small fish from the water and tossing it back. "They need to know what came before." She sat beside him and pulled a worn journal from her satchel, the one he'd left open that night long ago. Now it was half filled with her writing. "I've been recording the stories," she said. "Not just mine. Yours. Theirs. This land's." "Good," he murmured. "Someday someone will need them." When the first snow dusted the fence posts, the ranch stood steady. The roof held, the walls didn't creak. Inside, the fire burned strong. Keoma stood by the window, watching it fall. Behind her, Silas added another log to the fire and said, "You ever think about the day we met?" She turned slightly. "Every day." He smiled faintly. "I paid $5 for a girl the world wanted to forget. But turns out I bought back my own soul." She walked to him, placed a hand over his. "And I gave away my fear for the price of a name." The wind howled once outside, then faded. Inside the house, the silence was no longer empty. It was full. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.